Good morning or afternoon, whichever section you're in. This is going to be a video to try to give you a roadmap to the end of the course and recap what we've done and give you an idea of what's expected of you to finish off the course successfully. So it is Construction 3360, Structures 1. Okay, I have two sections. The first section is going to be Monday and Wednesday, 8:30 to 10:20. The other section is Monday and Wednesday, 12:30 to 2:20. Okay, right now you should have in Canvas the outline, either in assignment syllabus or on the grading sheet, of what's expected of you and the percentages associated with each of those groups. So if you go to Canvas, you ought to be up to date. Okay, between, by now, probably, this is last week of class. I'm taping this the week before that. But by the time this is aired, you should have everything pretty well turned in, and the grades should all be posted. Okay, I'm going to have to go back through and look at the whole grading scheme for homework and make sure that every blank has a number or a zero in it. Okay, right now you could have a dash in it. The dash means that the grader has not received the homework for that particular assignment. So if you haven't turned it in, you probably ought to get with the TA, and Masa's taking care of this section, Section 1, and Aslisha's taking care of Section 2. Just email them and tell them the situation and work out a deal with them. I'm not going to get involved in that. I'll let them be the judge. They know my feeling. My feeling is if you can't hand it in when it's due, I don't know how you're going to find time to hand it in when it's late. But they can take it, and whatever they feel is fair, I'm going to live with. So make sure that you've got everything turned in that you want graded, because I'm going to go through there and I'm going to change all the dashes to zeros, and it's going to impact the final grade for your homework. So make sure you're up to date there, okay? Okay, so one component is the grade for homework. Okay, the next component of your grade is going to be the tests. Okay, we have 3 tests. So there's 3 of them, and right now you have taken all 3 tests. Okay, the 3 tests, I'm going to go through the material associated with that. The 3 tests then are going to be the second component of your grade. And the third component of your grade, which will happen next week, is the final exam. And that constitutes 25% of your course grade. So it's a fairly substantial amount. Okay, in order to take the test, we got to have a couple metrics that are going to be in place. Number 1, you've got to take the test. Okay? So, if you happen to be in Section 1, this is May 15, 2020. You guys drew the short straw. That's Friday. And it starts at 8 in the morning and it goes to 10:30. Okay? So I'll be releasing that test via Canvas at 8 o'clock a.m. You'll have until 10:30 to postmark it and get it back to me. Okay? So at 10:30, the cutoff, unfortunately, if you're later than 10:30, it's sad. It's really, really sad that you put yourself and myself in that position. But a rule, excuse me, a rule is going to be the rule. If you postmark after 10:30, unless you have an IEP, a 0 is going to go into the final grade calculation, and that probably isn't going to be a good thing. So please, 10:30. The test really will go from 8 o'clock a.m. until 10:15, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Okay? So 2 hours and 15 minutes and 15 minutes to process. 15 minutes to process the submittal. I don't care if you use all but 1 minute of that for the test as long as you can get it in on time. Okay? Most students tell me they need about 5 minutes to process and send. So you could have up to 10 extra minutes if you felt comfortable with that. So I'm going to design the test for 1 hour and 45 minutes. Okay? So you got half hour more than what I think it should take, and I'm sure that a couple students will prove me right that that's the time they need. Okay, so if you happen to be in the second group, okay, the second group meets at 12:30. That particular group has a final exam that is on Monday. Monday for 11:20, okay, or 5:11, excuse me, May 5:11. 5:11:20, and that test starts at 11:30 in the morning. 11:30 a.m. and goes to 2 p.m. So yours will be available on Monday at 11:30. At 11:30, you can go into Canvas. It'll open up, give you the test. You know the protocol. You've had a couple tests already online. So go grab it. Either use your own paper or use the paper associated with a printer. If you've got a printer, print it. If you don't, just watch the screen, read the problem, put it on your paper. You don't need to draw pictures other than what you would on the test, so you shouldn't have a whole lot of extra time. Take the picture, take the paper, do the problem, number them correctly, put them in numerical order when you transmit them back to me, and do the work. Do whatever you need to get the file together to send it to me. PDF is great if you can do that. If you can't, take a picture of each one, send a JPEG to me of each image in numerical order, and then I'll print them off and grade them. So you'll have the same process. Apparently 1:45 is about when you should be thinking about getting it ready to return, submit it, so it's postmarked by 2 o'clock. So that's what you're going to have. There's your time. Section 1, 8:30 start. Friday, 8 o'clock, be ready. Section 2, 12:30 start. Be ready on Monday at 11:30. And you'll have access to the tests, okay? So you've got the homework, the 3 tests, and the final exam. So the only thing we've got left now is what is going to comprise of that final exam. So take a look at it and tell you what I think. Then I'm going to go through an old test and tell you what's been happening in the past. And when we get done, hopefully you've got everything you need. Okay, the test. All 3 of your tests have been curved. The curve has been a little over 76. I've relaxed it a little bit. Okay? So this particular final will be curved also. So by the time we get done, we'll have 3 tests and a final curved to 76 or so. If you've done your homework the way you're supposed to, you're going to be well over 76 for a homework grade, which is going to pull your score well above 76 as an average. Okay? So hopefully you've got that. Now, as far as the homework goes, make sure you deal with Masa or ask Leisha, because once it's a 0, it's a 0. If it's a dash, you've got some wiggle room. If it's a 0, it's a 0. So please make sure you attend to that detail before you get yourself in a bind. Okay, so we got the final exam. When we get done, Canvas is going to do all the mathematical calculations for me. It's going to extend it all the way out to the right-hand column. since we've curved all the tests and the final, the curve for the course is pretty well set in stone. There will be very little room at all to move. So the course curve is designed to be predicated by the test curve and the final curve. So at the end of the semester, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the last column in mine. Mine's got all your names on it. And I'm going to look at the course grade. And here's what the syllabus shows it, but I'm going to explain it because I don't want you to wonder what I do and how I do it. It's no mystery. I'm going to take your test. I'm going to look at your score for the course, and I'm going to compare it to this little guy right here. And if you fall anywhere from 89.95 to 100, you're going to get an A. 79.95 to 89.94, you're going to get a B, a C, D, or an F. Okay? We've only got about 3 people in each section actually right now, if I'm looking at the data correctly, that are in jeopardy of not getting themselves in a position to pass the course. So you 3 people, I think you know who you are. You probably ought to put a little bit of effort in so that you haven't wasted the financial expenditure plus the 15 weeks of hassle that you've gone through in order to get a grade that's passing for the course. So there's going to be the grade scale. Your first question, what if I get a 89.93? This answers it. If it falls in between these two numbers, it's going to be a B. Well, I'm only 2 100ths from an A. You're right. That's why when you study for the test, figure out where you're at, where you need to be, and don't go for the fringe. Because if you go for the fringe and you fall short, you're putting yourself in a bad spot, because this is what's going to happen. A phone call and an email is not going to change it. Okay? So it's up to you. You work to get what you need, and make sure you give yourself some slack just in case you fall a little short of what you think you get. Okay? So please, don't put yourself in a position. I don't want to see an 89.94. It bothers me, but I got to stop somewhere. And if I keep moving it down 100th each semester, a few years we're going to have 50% getting an A. It doesn't work that way. Okay? So that's the scale. So when you get the final grade posted for your final exam, go to the course grade, look at this, look at the number you have, and you should know what the BRSR is going to send you. Okay, so we've had 3 tests this semester. Okay? The first test was statics oriented. So I'm going to kind of write in 3 little lines here which represent the tests. Okay? First of all, we have math. Second of all, we had statics. And let's go vectors first. I like vectors because vectors are vectors and statics. Okay, in the statics we had 2 conditions. We had equilibrium and we had a resultant. So you ought to be able to handle math problems, sine, cosine, tangent. You ought to be able to handle log cosines, law of sines. You ought to be able to handle the quadratic equation. And you ought to be able to handle anything associated with simple high school type math. Okay, vectors. You ought to be able to rip them apart and put them back together. Okay? You ought to be able to find the components. You ought to be able to take the components and put them back together and find the vector. Statics, you ought to be able to handle the equations of sum of forces in the x, y, and sum of the moments about a point. If it happens to be an equilibrium, those are going to be 0. If it happens to be a resultant, those are going to be the components of the resultant. You ought to know the difference between concurrency and non-concurrency. If they're concurrent, the moment goes away. That means concurrent. they all come to a common point. Non-concurrent means they've got parallelism in them. If they're parallel, that requires us to worry about a moment, and if it's a moment, then we've got 3 equations. So there's one set. We moved on, and when that was chapters out of the one book I had, the Hibble book, and the first chapter of your book, I believe. Okay, we went to chapter 2, which is axial loading. We did tension and compression. We had 2 equations. We had one for stress, and we had one for elongation. You got to be able to handle those guys. We moved on, and we did truss. Okay, over here with the statics, we were doing trusses reactions. We were doing beam reactions. We were doing a bunch of different things. So part of this, with three force mechanisms, we were doing all of that. But trusses, you ought to be able to find the reactions, and you ought to be able to find the member forces by using the method of joints. Okay, that pretty much got us out of chapter number 2. Okay, then we moved on to chapter 3, and chapter 3 was associated with beams. Okay, a lot of beams in chapter 3, and you ought to be able to handle terminal reactions. We had 2 types of beams, a cantilever, simple. You ought to be able to take and draw a shear diagram, moment diagram, you ought to be able to handle that. You ought to be able to deal with cross-sectional properties. You ought to be able to find the area. You ought to be able to find the centroid. You ought to be able to find the moment of inertia and the first moment of the area, or Q. Okay, you ought to be able to do that. You ought to be able to handle the stress equations. You ought to be able to handle B and V. And you ought to know that the allowable stress has to be bigger than the actual, and the actual is developed with those equations with a moment and shear coming from here and the cross-sectional properties coming from there. And then you ought to be able to handle page 114. Canned equations for common beams. And then our last